Hi. Today we have Dr. Madan Srinivasan, who's an industry expert. He has actually traversed quite a long on the journey of innovation and patenting. And here today. He's going to share his journey on his colorful and rich experience in coming out with various different products in the cloud analytics area, patenting especially. He's been awarded as the top scientist by IBC. A couple of times he's got the Best Innovator Award from Marquez. He's been given the Best Manager Award from Forbes. And for the last 4 years consecutively, I think in Accenture, he's been getting the Best Innovator Award. So this is not a mean task by anybody to achieve. And we are here today to find out what does it take for somebody to come out with what's the kind of habits that you need to foster to have those things and share his rich experience. So I think welcome, Madan. So I think we connected, I think at a security conference a couple of years or 2 or 3 years ago, and we have been in touch. So it's great having you on this talk, the Turn It Around series. So you just walk us through. And I also noted in your experience, you started off as a teaching. You also had a teaching background, and how did it all, tie up together? And it'll be great to hear your journey. So handing it over to you.
Hi, Kiran. So glad to join you on your fourth edition of Turn It Around. Happy to be featured in H2T TV. So glad.
Thanks, Madan. So yeah, just walk us through how your journey has been. How did you, end up doing what you're doing? Was academics so strong a focus all along your journey? Because I see you, after your MTech, you straight away went to your PhD. Then you did an academic stint. Then you came back to the industry. So you can just walk us through your experience and journey.
Sure. So I think given my family background and whatever I have experienced in my childhood, something made me very clear in the beginning of my journey that money is very temporary. So like how much ever the investment or the base money that you are going to have is not permanent. That is what the lesson I have learned from my own father and my relatives and everybody, because I come from we were supposed to be a rich family for the kind of businesses we have done, but I have seen a huge amount of loss. I wouldn't say up down, but I have seen down. So that was the kind of background that I had. So it is very very clear. I even if I look at my school journey. I was in a big convent to start with, later moved on to a normal school, then government school. So it was a kind of a downward journey. So
Okay.
all throughout my childhood, this is what I learned. So at the same time, by the time I reached to my bachelor's degree, somehow I could able to realize education or degrees are going to be the real asset rather than the physical asset that anybody will own for some period of time, which is not permanent. So I made something clear since beginning that I will focus on building myself. Probably like, of course, financial background is needed for anybody, but I was quite focused on education. Over a period of time, that thought process has grown towards intellectual property. So I am a person who believe in education, intellectual property, and then comes the physical property, right? So that was the basic philosophy in which I think I was brought up, and the experiences that I have had. So as soon as I completed my bachelor's degree with a kind of a different struggle, I was not fully contented. So I do know that I need to pursue my higher education before I dedicate myself completely to the industry. So I started my master's degree at MGR University, and so I know that given my family's financial background, I wouldn't be able to survive to get into a full-time education. So I got into a special program for my MTech through merit. So parallelly, I started working in an engineering college also. So for 5 years, in my career, for 5 years, I spent in different engineering educations. But however, I think during my teaching journey, what I did was, while I love teaching, but I also made sure hands-on experience is something, whatever engineer you are. So I came from IT computer science background, but for any engineer, hands-on is something they need to practice. So wherever I served in the 5 years of my career in the beginning, I made sure like I developed the website for the universities or the education institutions that I was part of. I started developing their web servers. I started making use of cloud services even in 2006-2007 period, providing email services, making use of Google Apps, etc. So which made me to be a notable teacher. At the same time, I was also contributing to the organization wherever I worked for in different way. So post that, so I completed my MTech, and I was preparing myself for my PhD admission. So in between, I took 2.5 years of time. I do know that PhD is going to be a kind of tapas. So I wanted to really do it in a right way. So I prepared myself to be ready to enroll for my PhD degree. 2.5 years I took. I focused on my research, data gathering, and I published a few more papers, and then I enrolled myself into PhD. So by the time I enrolled for my PhD, I do know that now I am ready for pursuing my PhD along with getting into industry. So in couple of months after enrolling my PhD, I started looking out for a suitable industry opening. So Infosys was kind enough to take me into consideration, and they have provided me a fantastic job in their education and research department. So I joined as a member of education and research department at Infosys. It's around 4 years of journey. So I started my career as Java and operating system SME. The journey was so good, but as soon as I joined Infosys, I saw Infosys like any other service companies, especially in India and the globe, they want to get into cloud. So I saw the huge potential and a big gap of people, especially. So I quickly got into cloud in just a few months of my joining Infosys, and somehow, so I joined Infosys in 2010. Between 2010 and 11, along with my team members and my interns, so we executed very interesting. We tried executing very interesting cloud projects, and very successfully in 2011 beginning, proudly, like the team which I led, we deployed the first private cloud in India at Infosys. So that was a very important milestone in my career, which has taken me to places. And also to add on, after getting the first private cloud deployed at Infosys, we used the same platform and the laboratory further for performing a variety of cloud and cloud security related researches. We did very, very interesting research work, and which we have submitted back to Infosys. Through all my contribution, notably Infosys has appreciated me with another award that is called Infosys Cloud Tech Guru Award in 2012. So I think this particular incident has made enormous to my profile. People started noticing what I am and who I am. And then I also served Infosys and its selective customers to consult them on cloud infrastructure, cloud security, etc. So my journey at Infosys was so delighting. I enjoyed each day, and it was so mesmerizable journey, I would say. So from then on, while I was pursuing my cloud ambitions and the cloud learnings at Infosys, I got a direct call from one of the known companies from Singapore, GSTF. So GSTF is the company which has introduced cloud computing to Singapore. So they are very small but very niche and quite known in the region for introducing cloud computing and any other advanced technologies for that matter. So I got a call from them, and looking at the company profile, I do know that this is going to be the company which will make my further journey expanded. So I happily joined them, and I joined GSTF Singapore as principal consultant at the beginning. It was less than 3 months. My CEO, Dr. Anton Ravindran, who's a very renowned entrepreneur in Singapore, who was awarded as Entrepreneur of the Year at Singapore for consecutive 2006 and 2007. So he could identify a little greater potential in me, and then, as I said, in less than 3 months of time, he made me an assistant director for the company. So he handed over technology, consulting, and corporate certifications to my hand. So I stayed with GSTF for another 2 years, and I managed technology and consulting and corporate certifications for the company. So my journey at GSTF was so enriching, a lot of learnings under the great leadership of Dr. Anton. I was not aware that he was preparing me to be a leader for something else. I enjoyed the journey. In addition, I was also instrumental in expanding GSTF's footprint beyond Singapore at Philippines as well as in Middle East. We started with Oman, later we expanded it to Jordan. So the journey was so enriching and so memorable once again. So from there, around 2015, I had a family reasons for which I need to move back to India. So I was looking at where I am going to land. So of course, Infosys and my previous team was so glad to take me back. I was also exploring a few other opportunities. I wanted to explore and experience different challenges in my life. So that is where I had few offers, and Accenture is one among them. But among everything, Accenture had the opportunity at its special unit called Accenture Innovation Center for Analytics, and in which they had a very important role at their research wing. So I happily joined. I do know that this is the company which will shape me or which will prepare me for the future battles which I am going to face. So I happily joined Accenture, and initially I joined Accenture as IoT analytics lead. We had some business reason to put the IoT analytics on hold, and then I took over big data analytics lead role at the innovation center. And again, notably, at the beginning of 2016, I could able to set up the first enterprise grade big data Hadoop cluster for Accenture Innovation Center for analytics, and that was another milestone in my career, and that setup was used for one of the highly funded projects in 2016 and 17, which is a huge data monetization, data services project, and it is still being continued. And within a short period of time, we had a critical business requirement to build products in cloud analytics portfolio. That is where my Accenture leadership wanted me to put my hand. Given my PhD is on cloud computing and my specialization is on analytics, they wanted me to lead the cloud analytics practice. So I took over that in the beginning of 2016, along with my big data journey. So, and given the kind of importance and the responses that we have got with clients, etc., so I wanted to completely focus my energy on cloud analytics. So I dropped big data after 2 years at Accenture, and it has been 4+ years my journey is carrying on with cloud analytics.
Okay, fantastic. I think that's a tremendous journey that you have taken across various verticals, portals, and big data and cloud as well. So I think at some point of time, or I don't know whether your current portfolio happens to be in charge of innovation. Are you still in charge of innovation? Or I think because you have been innovating on the innovation spiral. So how did that happen? So when you keep making rapid experiments, they say you actually end up innovating. So was it like that, or was there always a planned effort towards, we need to create some innovation here, or it was you working on the latest and greatest, and anything that you do ends up becoming an innovative stuff? So was it like that, or was it a planned effort towards innovation?
So I like the way how I described my understanding of how education is important. Similarly, since my schooling, I am the person who always tried to do something new and something extra, and I wanted to differentiate myself among the crowd. So in my schooling, I am a speaker. I participate in debate, and I write poems and articles. And more importantly, I started developing an interest towards writing dramas and directing them. In fact, at my school, I have directed dramas at All India Radio and Ceylon Radio level, also in some of the TV channels with my drama troupe. I think this has come from, I don't know, I think this is there in my family blood maybe. So even after I moved on to my college life, in my bachelor degree, once again, I had some challenges to prove myself among the crowd and the other classmates. So I took the paper presentation track. More than why I liked writing paper or doing research, I would say that was a journey that I was exploring to differentiate myself. So I was exploring what would be the right channel which I can choose and I can make me differentiated from others. So, as part of my bachelor degree itself, I have presented more than 10 research papers in various symposium. At least if I remember correctly, in my third year and fourth year, my professors used to encourage a lot, but every semester I will have a lack of attendance because I would have been out of college on duty to present papers in various colleges across the country. So I think my research paper writing and exploration made me to be a natural researcher. And as soon as I joined my career at engineering colleges and universities, as I said, I was building their websites and I was building their web servers, email servers, app servers, etc. So I used to do all self-research. So I think I never planned to develop something as a product, but somehow the product building was a natural part of myself. That is how, as soon as I entered into industry also, whenever I did either a project or even doing a consultation assignment, I always took a product approach. And interestingly, patent journey is not something very new to me in Accenture. I would say the patenting journey has started with my interaction at Infosys, at Infosys IP cell. And as I mentioned earlier, in the cloud research laboratory at Infosys, we did a lot of research, and I had a good time interacting with IP cell, and they have drafted patents for the suitable patents with the relevant stakeholders at Infosys IP cell. I was part of it. I was not completely part of all the contributions. So I had an experience of what is patent and what are all the different processes, but I was not aware of the structural process. Then as soon as I moved on to Accenture, as soon as I took over this cloud analytics portfolio, we started building some of the interesting cloud optimization projects. And we had one opportunity to interact with our patenting team. So that is a practice. So whenever there is a new product, after a certain time, the Accenture patent team will connect with the product team and they will explore if there is any patentable opportunity. So that is how my journey started. I still remember it was somewhere in the mid of 2016. We connected with the Accenture patent team and they went over our product and they actually liked the way how we build the product uniquely, that is differentiated from other products, and also the way how we have presented. So then later on, the patent team has trained us in the right way. So we put almost 8 to 9 months of time to prepare and come up with our first patent. So I named my first product as iForesight. And that was
Madan, I think, sorry to interrupt you here. When you said we've developed a product using a unique set of principles, so what was your product philosophy when you were embarking on that journey, wherein your product had those unique capabilities or features? So I think before I just lose track on it, I just wanted to have your thoughts on that. What is that? What was unique about that?
Okay, so see, unique. So okay, when we talk about patent, to get any product patentable, that product has to have 4 properties, right? So which we call it as patentability. In fact, I do run.
I think my question runs a little before you actually come to the patenting, because when you start off with a product, you obviously don't think about patenting right off, right? Like that's what you also said. But you wanted to create something unique and something which wasn't existing in the market before and solves a business problem. So what was your principles, like your core principles or rule of thumb that you followed before the patenting happened?
Okay. That's an interesting question. So, let me give you the actual scenario that happened. Right. So we were trying to build possible use cases and prototypes around cloud analytics, and we did not have any planned direction because that's a very niche area. If you go back and try to explore, what is cloud analytics back then in 2015 and 16, there was no proper definition also. So the area was niche and you can develop anything and that is going to be the benchmark for others to follow. So we were exploring multiple aspects, and that is where we have got some requirement from Accenture's cloud platform. So we call it as ACP, right? So they came and they said that among other problems that our customer faces, this is the big problem. So we have a huge amount of data, and a lot of data people store in cloud, and cloud alone generates lots of data while servicing the customers. Now, while cloud is making the corporate customers so happy and makes all the technical benefit, etc., the question was, is there any way to optimize the cost, the base cost of the cloud usage itself, right? So then, that was the problem. How can we save cost for cloud usage? It is something like, like you have a car and you brought it, let's say, for 10 lakh rupees in Indian currency, and you are putting petrol and you are doing service and you are using it. Now, the question is there any way I can save cost on my car usage, right? So it's a very interesting question. You are paying what you are using, but how can you save cost? And we started exploring. Then surprisingly, we understood, like, if we can properly play around with data and other utilization patterns in cloud, we will still be able to save cost. Now, we started looking at, is there any existing solution in the market which we can start using it at Accenture, right? So what is the point in putting a separate team and investment towards it, unsure of whether the team will succeed in building up the product or not over a period of time, and the waiting time, everything is waste in the corporate environment. In corporate, it is all about today's money, not tomorrow's, right? So we wanted to see if some provider, some third party, or some of our known vendors, if they are providing a similar service, we wanted to use that service instead of reinventing our wheel, right? So when we looked at, we came across some of the descriptive analytics solutions. So just to give a little background, broadly in analytics, we talk about multi-generation analytics. The first three generations are descriptive analytics, we call it as first generation. Predictive analytics, we call it as second generation. And the third generation is called as prescriptive analytics. So there were a lot of vendors. If lot may not be the right term, I would say number of vendors. They had descriptive solutions. They will have solution which will talk about what data you had and what spend you had and the split of the spend, etc. But very less people, they had either predictive or prescriptive. Of course, prescriptive solutions were very less in the market back then. Then we don't want to really take a simple solution from somebody, a third party solution provider, and then we don't want to serve our customers. So that is where we get a clear opportunity to invent something which was not there in the market. So to answer your question, for us, rather than anything, we had a necessity to build something to serve our customers, right? As the popular proverb says, necessity is the mother of invention. So we did had a necessity, and we started building it out. So that is where when we built out the first product, very interestingly, I said about no other competitors had a similar product, and the uniqueness became a natural part of our first product.
Okay, fantastic. I think self-healing systems and prescriptive ways of solving problems were non-existent at that point of time. I remember you were mentioning that all of this billing, especially in the cloud, is a huge unknown area, wherein you get metered pay-per-use, pay on demand, and the EC2 instances in AWS or Google GCP instance, they keep on running. And you have no track. At the end of the month, you get a bill, and like sometimes it's staggering, and then you fail to find out what's happening. And there's a lot of funny stories around that. Sometimes you increase the number of VMs. You don't know how the licensing actually works there, because VMs is like number of cores, number of licensing. All of that is a very complicated area. And if you could offer and solve a pain point there, I think that would be very well received. So I think that's what I got to know about it. So does your solution work across multi-clouds like Azure, AWS, and GCP and things like that, or is it specific to each vendor?
Okay, so we have multiple solutions in our cloud analytics portfolio. There are a few that works across multiple vendors, and but again, when it comes to cost optimization solutions, we tried building a generic solution. Later, we realized when you build a generic solution, it is not really going to suit for all the cloud.
Correct.
For the fundamental reason that unlike many other products, not all clouds are built on the same principle, right? So their services are very unique, the way they serve the customer. So we started building out individual solutions for individual vendors, and even within individual vendors, we started building it out for individual products. For example, if you take AWS Cloud, we will have a number of solutions for compute itself. We will have separate set of solutions for storage. We will have separate set of solutions for databases, for PaaS, and the same repeats for Azure and Google Cloud Platform, etc.
Correct. Because I've seen companies, they work in that micro niche of computing only reporting issues, or only email, or only this, and then they give you the billing on that. And then I think that would have been very interesting back then to create something like that. But I think these days AWS by itself creates some detailed amount of reporting. But I think when you chanced upon it, it wasn't very mature, that space. But still, there's a lot of work to be done. So how do you actually ensure that while you're creating stuff, you're not infringing on somebody else's patent? That's a very tricky question to ask, but I'm asking you that because it's a very closely contested area. So how do you ensure that when you're chancing upon embarking a journey that, because people are working left, right, center all across the world, and what you're developing, somebody parallelly is developing in maybe Singapore or Japan or Israel or wherever it is. So how do you ensure that while you're fighting, I did have this issue when we were working upon a project in Infosys, that a similar sort of closed patent was being filed by HP when we were doing something. So how does that work? That you ensure that you're not infringing on somebody else's IP. So it's a very tricky question to ask. I understand. There is no straightforward answer, but still, what is your experience there?
I think I would rather say there is a straightforward answer. So, and this is a very similar routine questions I face whenever I address a different set of audience in different of my webinars and seminars, right? So, see, first to patent is one of the keys in intellectual property journey, right? So, as I said, multiple people are going to work on every problem, but the question is who's going to really come out with the technical solution and who's going to file a patent, right? And once again, so it is all about choosing your area. So if your area is niche, or if your area may not be niche, but the problem that you are taking in your area, if it is new, if it is niche, and people have not solved some problems that you are trying to solve, naturally you will end up becoming a future patent holder if you are going to pursue the patent filing journey, the process in a structured way. So that way, it's all about preparing yourself before you get into solution and do the proper background work, and then understand your problem, and then start building your solutions. And while you are building your solution, make sure you keep cross verifying your approach, your solution, whether it is replicating something existing in the world. So while you rightly said, Kiran, multiple, I mean, millions and millions of companies are working across the globe and various stuff. It is also true that thousands and thousands of patents are being filed every year in every country, right? So of course, infringement and patent violation cases also happens, but what we need to look at is the number of patents filed versus the number of allegations, and the cases are like incomparable, right? It will be like less than 5 or 3%, right? So which actually says every year more than 90% of naturally true innovation that is happening in the industry, and that is the way forward. And also when we understand about patent, we also need to understand some holes in the patent process. So now, who can file a patent? In a simpler way, anybody can file a patent. If you ask me a question, can I file a patent on something which I have not invented, which somebody else have invented? Okay, actually yes, you can. Nobody can stop you, right? Patent filing is it's something very similar, like somebody is applying for a job, right? So applying job alone is not something that you are going to be eligible to get the job. For example,
correct.
Right? So that way, anybody can file a patent. Now, how to differentiate the patent to be a quality patent, and how to make sure that this is a unique invention and it is not having infringement, etc. It is all about what is your background, right? If you ask me, those MNCs, companies like Accenture, you come from Infosys, and the other companies, just to name a few, IBM, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, etc. They will have a very standard and stringent IP processes, right? If
Correct.
somebody wants to file a patent.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. You did clarify that aspect, but my point was more to do with, like, when you have a set of engineers working on a burning problem. So typically what the advice that a lot of innovative companies give to their engineers, I believe, is that don't worry about infringements or patent violations, right? You do what you're supposed to do, come out with an innovative. Later on, we'll figure out whether it is going to be infringing. So
100%.
yeah, exactly.
100%.
Because having a patent kind of stifles innovation. Oh, that guy's already done it. Let us not. So we have to think very different. So just give them the creative freedom to do it is what I got to know from a patent attorney. So he was saying that always the advice is for teams, go ahead and innovate the way you want to. Later on, we'll figure out whether you're actually touching upon something. And then, of course, you can work your way around the patent in a slightly different fashion that, obviously, as you said, if somebody has filed it first, then you have lost the right to file it after that person. So, you'll have to take a slightly different path. But then that should not stifle your innovation journey.
No, exactly. So the target here or the primary objective is to get the solution rather than filing a patent.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And once if you have the solution, that is where the the technical evaluation of patenting and then the legal process come into picture. And in the process, the patenting team will try to identify in your solution what is that one thing that is unique. So
absolutely,
people many times confuses that patenting is all about the entire product from starting to ending that is completely new. So which is not necessary to be. Your entire product can be totally new, which nobody have built. Probably like you come up with a new smartphone which is neither an Android or iPhone, right? Come up with something totally different. So that is a next level. That kind of next level inventions are also patentable. At the same time, you enhance from an existing service, and in the process of enhancement and in the process of like coming up with easiness of the solution, what is that one specific nature, one small uniqueness, right? That alone is suffice to get a patent filed for any inventor.
True. So having said that, I just wanted to check what is the philosophy behind filing a patent in different countries. So I could gather from your rich profile that you've got patents in US, Australia, Europe, and in India. So how does that work? I mean, why do you have to file a patent across multi? Is it the validity of the patent is only in that region, or if you turn it into a business idea like the patent, the commercial viability of that is governed by the patent? How does it work actually?
Very interesting question and very relevant question for today's world. And given that the world is locked inside home and all the businesses are happening, in a simpler way, projects are geographic bound, right? When you are filing a patent, patents are also geographic bound. Meaning, let's take an example. At A220, your team comes with a unique product, right? Now, I know you are a software architect expert, and let's imagine like you come up with a very new way of building software architecture for future. Now, if your team files a patent, let's say in India, okay,
True.
and you get the patent granted after all the evaluation process by Government of India, and your patent is granted. So once the patent grant is given to you, as per the patent right, from the day of your patent filing, you will own 20 years of validity to monetize or use your patent with your control, right? Meaning after 20 years, your idea become public. Anybody can make use of it. You will not own it. The 20 years is when you need to make use of the monetary or any other benefits out of it. So now, let's say there is another company which is running in a different country, let's say Australia. Somebody from Australia, they look at your architecture, the patent that you have filed, and they wanted to build a similar or the same architecture or the small product, okay? And then they started either using it within their company or they are selling it to their other customers. Now, even if you come across this patent and this process that is happening at Australia, legally you won't be able to file a case against them. Okay.
Okay.
Now, can they file a patent in Australia or any other region which you have filed it in only India? The answer is yes. Okay. Okay. So if you are filing a patent, whether you are filing it in one region or multiple region, during your evaluation, for 100% sure, every patent office will ask for uniqueness. What that means is, let's say, if the idea that you have filed it in India, somebody else at US, they have already implemented it. Now, you will lose the opportunity of getting that as getting that filed as a patent. Okay. At the same time, if somebody takes your idea, the granted patent, and they built a same product with a single modification, they can file a patent for that modification along with including your other product feature. Right? So that way, though you may be the owner of that idea, but you have already lost that idea because you have not filed a patent in Australia.
Oh, okay. So that's how it kind of works across geography. So every geography that you're planning to have a commercial viability of that thing, you better file a patent if you want to safeguard it.
So there is a simple thumb rule behind any patent filing. And again, after filing your primary patent, the non-provisional patent, you will only have 12 months of period to file your other region filings, beyond which you won't be able to file it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So how does it work for sorry to interrupt you, how does it work for guys in US who actually have hundreds of patents, like Cisco has a lot of patents, then Accenture itself has a lot of patents. So let us say that whatever they've created, somebody in India does it. So how does the jurisdiction work? So like, they say, will the Indian patent office check with the US global database that, okay, there is already a patent on this, and then it's on the onus on them to ensure that they either accord you a patent or they reject your patent.
Correct.
So, okay.
Yes, it is a later way that you have explained.
Okay.
So when anybody files a patent in any patent office, the patent offices will tap into the global digital data, both in normal web as well as the deep web. Right. So anywhere anything is, not even filed as a patent. Even let's say, for example, I have written a research paper on a product that you are building now. Let's imagine I have written a research paper 1 year before, and that has got published. Right now, if your patent is very similar to the approach that I have used in my paper, even this stops you to get a patent grant from the specific patent office.
Okay. True. Because in US always has this complaint that India doesn't respect patent too much. So that's the other extreme. And then Indians claim that we have not patented yoga and a lot of other natural medicines, which the world over people are using and benefiting, health-wise. So I think there's a good and bad of both the extremes. The other extreme is, okay, if somebody finds a drug for cancer and it says it's patentable, then you have to pay through your nose to get a cure for it. So it's good that, medical inventions are not patentable. So I guess there is some law in India, at least, that allows you to have that. If it's like life-saving drugs, then you cannot patent them. So if it is ordinary problems, then probably you can do that. So that is really nice. And a couple of questions on patenting, because you have a rich baggage of patents. So how much does it take to actually hold a patent? So do you have to pay a recurring license every year to hold a license, just to hold a license, a patent license? Is there any fees just to maintain it?
Yes. So many people think that once if the patent is granted, and you will have the 20-year right to hold the patent without doing anything. It is not that way. So there is a timely renewal that one need to maintain with respect to every patent offices. And again, this renewal period varies from country to country, right? So once after the patent granted, the usual renewal time will be 3 years to 5 years, the usual renewal time. So this is to make sure that the patent that is granted, whether that is an active innovation that somebody is making benefit or monetary out of it, right? For example, uh, you know, any country for that matter. Imagine if we have some patents on operating system, which was filed, let's say, 15 years before, right? Now, the world has changed a lot. Now we are on to mobile operating systems, we are on to cloud, etc. So now the question is, if a particular company decides that they don't make much profit on the product, the operating system product that they have filed patent 15 years before today, then there is no point that they need to further invest and renew that patent and maintain it, because it is not giving any benefit. At the same time, even the patent officers need not to keep that patents maintained actively,
Oh,
right?
okay.
It's a two-way cost. So that is where, like, if you see the continual benefit and the monetary benefits through the filed and granted patents, then you will go and keep renewing it. Otherwise,
Okay.
stop it whenever the business decides to stop.
Okay. Okay. And what would be a ballpark estimate for having a patent? Like I saw in one of your talks that you said it requires at least a lakh of rupees to file a patent, at least in the Indian scenario. So typically, how does that work? When you are actually with an employer, obviously the employer takes care of that, or you're running your own business, then obviously you account for it. But let us say you quit your company and join another company, so still you will be you will jointly own it along with your previous employer, right? I think that's the way it works.
Yes. So we need to understand that uh, you know wherever you file, right? So there will be two parties.
Correct.
The entity, either an individual person or the company, the entity that owns the patent, and inventors. These are the two different parts for any patent, right? If you are working in a corporate and if your company is filing a patent, then be very clear, the idea is owned by your company, okay, unless you file it by yourself. Now, who's an inventor? Whether you work for that company or you exist on that company, you will be the inventor, right? So when we say company filed a patent, no company can go and file a patent. Company is not just the offices and the computers and the chairs and tables. So only an employee, that is where this is called intellectual property rather than your physical property, right? So there should be a human, he should use his brain to invent something. So only that can be filed as an IP. So if you are working in any company, your company will own the idea, but wherever you go, whether you will be associated with that company or you are exiting that company, you will be the inventor for that particular idea throughout your life. Now, coming to the costing scenario, once again, the costing differs dynamically. It is very similar to, let's say, the electricity charges for the household and industry, whether for urban and rural. Similarly, your physical registration of your car, two-wheeler, or your houses, right? There is a residential or civil category and then the luxury category, right? Similarly, even in patent, there are multiple categories. If you as an individual without any company's background, if you are filing a patent, the charges are very, very nominal, right? In India and even in other countries. If you are a small company, right? You are a SME, small medium enterprises, right? Depending upon the number of employees and the kind of business or the business that you do per year, makes the middle bracket for patent filing cost. If you are from a large company, then the patent filing charges are much higher. Okay.
Correct.
So I said minimum 1 lakh rupees should be given to the inventors, especially from an academic background. So for academicians to file a patent, the charges are very, very nominal. There are a good amount of relaxation in the fees in various category for individual academicians and small schools and universities and colleges, right? But if you ask me, for an industry, for a corporate to file a patent in let's say in US and maintain it for 20 years, the charges somewhere between 30 to 35 lakhs per patent.
Yeah, exactly. Because a rubber company is shelling out $5,000 to $10,000 on a minimum per year for certain patents, and if you have a large number of them, then it's a huge number. So
Correct.
that is quite a deal. True. And so I think we are kind of coming to a close of what we have discussed. So any thoughts on what is how people should actually create a product mindset in terms of leading teams, and how have you been able to instill the sense of creative joy or innovation within teams? Because you have a deadline to meet, you have a product that should succeed in the market, and you got those business concerns, technology concerns. So what do you think are the best takeaways for people on how they should focus on innovation typically, and then raise the bar and go to something better than what they have done? As you said, the next level of innovation when we want to plan. So what do you think should be the mindset? Firstly, the product mindset and the mindset among the teams. So how should that actually happen?
Really very meaningful question, and I don't think there is any fixed answer to this question. I think this will be the secret sauce of the successful teams and successful companies. True. Every company and every successful team will use the different ones. So let me try to answer from my angle. So how to get the product mindset? To get a product mindset, one has to move away from consumer mindset to provider mindset, right? So if while you are trying to build a product, or while you are trying to solve a problem, and you are trying to build a solution, if you are thinking in terms of consumer or the user of the product, so certainly whatever you come out with will be at a low quality level, and it will not meet the complete satisfaction of your future consumer, right?
Like Steve Jobs, he said, Henry Ford, it seems he was asked if you are going to create a set, if you ask the customer what he wants, he would say, I need faster horses. So he would not have said cars. So you have to get out from that consumer mentality and think about something that people haven't thought about. True.
Yes. So you need to start thinking about, the provider or the manufacturer, right? So, just imagine what is there in watch, right? In India, even you can buy a watch for 100 rupees, right? At the same time, for Rolex and Omega watches, people buy, people put minimum of 2 lakhs and onwards, right? So now, what is the difference between Rolex watch and your local Casio watch, right? Both are going to show you the same time, right? So nothing is going to do something else. Of course, there are other features, etc. But the primary objective of both the products is the same. But it is all about how you, build your product, and how you package it, and how you sell it to the right customer, right? So that is where to me, that is the the secret sauce of every successful team.
True. But that is about the product per se. But from a team dynamics perspective, like how do you arrange and align people goals versus organization goals versus business goals? Because you get guys who are sometimes freshers, some guys have a lot of experience in that area, some guys don't have. Some guys in the team might be only looking for an on-site opportunity, and like for him, innovation is not very important per se. So how do you align them and then create something that is awesome in the market, and because these are all different challenges, right? Like how do you how do you build such strong teams?
So, see, different leaders build different type of teams. So, my thumb rule is I always like to play around with tiny number and try to give a better result, right? So, very interestingly, as I am coming from the innovation center background, uh, we take people with certain qualities. So, probably the kind of employees they will be part of any innovation center for that matter will come with a typical innovation mindset. That is what I would imagine. And once again, uh, while formulating a team or while I take any resource onto my team, I think we will do a proper interview process. We will make sure that we are hiring the right candidate who will understand and serve our business requirements later. So I would say more than 50% of the problem comes from building the right team. So I think we are putting enough effort and necessary investments in building the right team. And post that, especially in the practice where I lead. So what we do is, as soon as a new team member joins the team, we make sure the necessary education that we are enabling and we are providing from our experience, etc. We do conduct a series of experience education sessions. We enable them. In addition, as we are part of the IT industry, it is necessary for everybody to get enabled and get certified in their respective technology or stream or whatever you call it, right? So we make sure our new employees are undergoing the right cloud certification and they understand the cloud ecosystem to a greater extent before they start solving the solution for our customers. So with a mix of all the strategies put together, I think so far we are successful in building what we have built.
True. I think building the right team is definitely the secret sauce. And you said you have some strategies on how to do that, which is good, because otherwise it's a big challenge to meet the business technology things. And how do you actually build thought leadership? As you said, for you, you had it right from your college days. Even during your bachelor's days, you were writing papers and research papers and so on. So you become an authority in that field. So they say success is not overnight. So if you trace back your journey of how Infosys accorded you a cloud guru, so probably you had a backlog of all those good research papers that you had published over the several years that had finally one fine day. So what would be your advice to somebody who's building their career on how they should actually build up, become an authority in their field and things like that? So what would be your journey, because you have a good amount of experience there?
Excuse me, Kiran.
Yeah. Yes, Madan. Carry on.
You want to ask the question from the beginning? So
Yeah, exactly. So the point was, what's your advice for somebody who's trying to build their career? How should they be an authority in their field? How should they establish leadership, technical leadership, thought leadership, get their hands dirty? You spent a good amount of years, even during your bachelor days, volunteering for people. During your MTech years, you built websites for your colleges and stuff like. So how does that? How does somebody embark on that journey? And what would be your advice for people who are starting on the technology route?
So I would say rather, I think coming from India, I do enjoy diversity in a true way. So we celebrate different capabilities that we see in our team members. So I think that is a clear reason for the success. So what we do is so as I said, the first secret sauce is build the right team and find the right team members. So as soon as they become part of our team, we make sure that we tap into their strong potential skill, whichever it is, and then we will also train our team members. I still remember in the initial days, I used to take uh, cloud technology classes to my team members. So I used to educate them on how practically a private cloud and public cloud is different, and how we can build a private cloud, what are all the technologies involved. So these are few interesting things which you won't be able to see it in any online course or certification content, or even in any textbooks, right? So these are all something from your experience. So that is what I used to do, enable my team members completely on making them understand what I understand, bringing them to my thought process. Similarly, we have seen there are some more guys in my team. They have also come from writing research papers in their past, right? So, but their way of writing papers and their journals and their conference tracks were very different. So, even myself and other team members, we try to tap into their potential and we try to learn from them. And I have made sessions on, what are all the techniques that I write paper, and what are the different type of papers that I have written in the past, explaining them, explaining my team members, taking them through the content, etc. So it is all about rightly educating the team members and bringing them towards your business objective. In fact, I think, I am a strong believer of teaching a person rather than giving money and helping, right? So teaching is the primary way the human life can be enhanced, or we can improve the human life to better. So like imagine if any of us would have not attended proper school and colleges, we will not be what we are, right? So it is about slow grooming of anybody and everybody. So at the same time, while we groom individual team members in our team, what we do is we celebrate their individual capability, right? So I am a strong believer of no two human being can do the same thing as it is, right? For example, the way I do brushing of my teeth can never be replicated by anybody else. It may be a funny, simple example, but that is how it is. Or in a simpler way, if I put a circle with a pen, if anybody else is trying to put a circle with the same pen, I'm sure there will be plenty of difference in a small circle that we have drawn using a simple pen. So everybody are unique, every brain is unique, and everybody do things differently, right? So to me, the big key is this uniqueness, this differentiation. So my strong belief is, if I take any problem, if I am going to solve that problem without referring to others, if I'm trying to solve any problem by myself, right, then that output is 100% unique. Nobody would have done it. So the infringement will come when I would have copied somebody, right? If I am referring something similar, etc. But when I invent, when I build, as long as I make sure I built with my own thought process, I bring my flavor into it, then certainly that is a unique solution. Now, the more interesting thing is, what I do is I put one more person, I put one more brain. So what will happen is, the same solution I will discuss with the other person, and I will ask his suggestion, and then I will enhance and I'll modify my solution with that person's solution. Now what happens is, this is a solution, this is produced by two minds. My mind will work differently, the other mind is going to work differently. Now when I put together, you imagine it is going to be 100% unique. Nobody can come and fight for right. That is how, very proudly at Accenture in my cloud analytics, we have a very selective set of 10 members or so, a very small, tiny team that does multiple portfolio services, and we embrace and we celebrate each one's individual quality while we complement and supplement our knowledge to each other.
Fantastic. I think that's rightly said. Small teams have great potential to achieve larger things. So that's really the nice part about it. And this teaching background that you actually have, your flair for teaching, was somebody in the family? Were you a part of? There was somebody in the family. You said you had a business family to start off with. So was teaching imbibed habit, or was it picked up on the way? Like, how did that happen?
As a formal teacher, by the time I started the teaching career, it was none.
Because we just finished September 5th yesterday, and I remember writing about teachers for my son's speech in school. So I think, who inspired you in that journey? Maybe that's interesting to hear.
I would, to be honest, I would say it is my family that has inspired me, because I still remember my father used to share his happy old moment. He used to say that his father, that is my grandfather, built a school for our locality when my father was in his childhood. So my grandfather built a school for our employees who worked in our our factories. But very interestingly, back then it was PUC, right? Not 10th standard, 12th standard, intermediate, etc. So none of my grandfather's son or daughter could able to pass PUC.
Surprisingly.
Right? So yeah, because my grandfather was owning a big business empire, and all his sons and daughters, they used to look after the business and manage the employees, all that. So their mind never went into education per se. So it was my grandfather's dream that at least any one of his own son will complete PUC and go and attend college, get college degree. That was his dream. So, but somehow my father and my uncles, they tried their level best to make their children getting into college, etc. I still remember by the time I complete my graduation, I was the second boy to complete a degree graduation in my entire family, larger family. So teaching is something I think that has come through my own self-thought or my family inspiration.
Fantastic. I think that's nice to hear, because and you seem to have more than made up for your grandfather's ambitions. Because he was
Thank you, Kiran.
Yeah, thanks. And one more interesting part, just before we end, to your personality is the fact that you said you were also you dream about visiting places, you dream about educating people from all walks of life. And then also the fact that you have a clay modeling side to you. So do you still model clay, or it was once upon a pastime that was there?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for that question. So clay modeling, once again, that has come in naturally. I started playing in clay, and I started making some, objects out of it. In fact, we recently completed Vinayaka Chaturthi festival. So if I remember the golden days of my old childhood, Ganapati Chaturthi, you'd be surprised, like every year, wherever I was, whether I will be in my home or I'll be with my relatives, I used to make the Vinayaka through clay. And we do puja to that, and then that is how we celebrate. So on Vinayaka Chaturthi, for everybody else it will be a different celebration. For me, my Vinayaka will sit in center of the house, and it will get all the puja stuff. So this year my father's health was not good, so we were visiting and we were taking care of him, so we couldn't celebrate. In fact, My family had come back from Singapore to India this year, and in fact, my wife wanted me to make the Vinayaka idol, keeping my two sons in front, and she wanted my sons also to see and learn clay model through his father. But somehow this year we couldn't do it. I hope we will get that dream achieved in future. And again, for your another question about teaching, yes, that is where I started my career. Um, to be very honest, I enjoyed teaching 5 years to youngsters of this country. I really, really enjoyed. And in fact, uh, I during my teaching career, I had a mixed opportunities from both very reputed universities and your normal self-financing colleges. I have always opted for the later because my thought process was if I would need to go to a very popular college in a particular town, technically these colleges will attract the creamy students, and in a way, I would imagine a talented students by themselves would get admitted. And somehow, as a teacher, I always feel that for a talented student, you really need not to teach and contribute, right? Whereas on the other hand, if you look at a small self-financing colleges, probably which is having a good management. They have a vision to serve the education society, not just business alone. Then such colleges, you will get a mixed students, a few creamy and majority of ordinary and a kind of students who will struggle to study, right? And I see in such colleges, that is where a teacher will play a very important role. And I would imagine for a good teacher, that is where they should be. So, as a responsible citizen, I wanted to serve such self-financing college. That is what I did, and I had a fantastic time with both my students community back then until today, and also whichever the organization I worked, the management they have taken care of me like it was my own organization. So it was a mutually win-win and happy days for three parties: me, my college management, as well as my students. So now, in fact, there are many people. They asked me, "How come you moved from teaching to industry?" So I think I would like to share that experience. The reason why I have moved to industry, and see, in the 5 years when I taught my students, in many occasions I came across tough students, and they become very friendly, they very close, and they started really learning from me, not just subject and also life. And I'm sure, I have made a lot of good citizens to our country. And there are my students, they are in abroad and they are making India proud as a good employers and responsible citizens in other countries as well. While I enjoyed teaching my students, and I made them get placed in selective good companies, etc. I realized over a period of time I couldn't really place majority of my students into big companies. Also because I was part of a normal self-financing colleges. That is where I asked my question. I asked these questions to myself that students, almost all the students are listening to your words, and they are changing the way they live their life. They are studying better. They are focusing on computer programming, etc. But at the end of their fourth year in their engineering education, whether in campus or off campus, they are unable to get job. So I realized myself that, along with teaching subjects, teaching life, I am missing to teach one more skill, and I don't know what that skill is. So I was evaluating that for quite some time. Then I realized, and I figured it out. I discovered myself that beyond these two skills, students also need an employability skill, right? That is where I realized I need to go to industry. I need to learn what is the real industry and what the industry wants, so that I can teach my future kids properly, and I can be a true good teacher, and I can enable not just few families, but all my students house with good job opportunities in future. So that is the primary reason I wanted to get into industry. So I moved on to IT industry almost 10-11 years before by now. And as I stay in any company, it is only making me realize that there are more for me to learn in order to teach my future kids, right? So and that is what, so very very clearly I am into my learning process. I am into my learning days for my future job. So I am still a student, probably like this is another graduation that I am doing it for my employability. So that, I think that would answer one more question that you have not asked, that my ambition is over a period of time, I don't know when, I want to contribute to Indian education community. So irrespective of the state, irrespective of the language, irrespective of gender, irrespective of rural or urban or forest or hill area, I really wanted to do something in Indian education sector. I don't know whether I'm going to do that as a educationist, professor. I don't know the part in which I'm going to serve, but I'm sure my future is dedicated to the teaching community.
Fantastic. I think that's very, very inspiring from you, Madan. I think life has taken a full circle. You started from teaching, went to the industry, and now you say your motivation to stay in the industry is to again plow back all those results back into teaching and inspiring and motivating guys. I think very noble thought. So I think we will, if you have leaders like you who actually want to give back to the community, give back to the education system, we will definitely be a rich nation, I think. And then we'll file a lot of patents and be on that innovation track and probably achieve the made in India dream that our Prime Minister talks of, like, make in India and made in India kind of stuff. So I think with that, thanks a lot, Madan, for your time. And definitely we will be connected. And thanks very much for your time. And look forward to your journey of inspiring more and more people on innovation and the education system and teaching itself. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kiran, for the great opportunity and your wonderful questions. You took back to my childhood. You made me remember about my family, my grandfather especially. I think he will be very happy listening this from heaven. And also, once again, tapping into my dream of what I really wanted to do in future. Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed all the questions and the time I spent. I wish you and Eturunti to go to greater heights. I do know it's been 4 years that we are associated, and I see the kind of energy that you bring in, your creativity, and the way how you have taken Eturunti to this level. I'm sure Eturunti and Eturunti TV will become a most popular entities in future days. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thanks, Madan. I think thanks very much for saying that. And definitely, I think I kept my word. I just talked to you when we met again that one day I'm going to interview on on my show. I think this was a couple of years back, and today I think I have fulfilled that word of mine. Thanks very much.
That is all mine.